I was just telling everybody a little bit about you, but I was wondering if you could introduce yourself a little more. You've done so many things, like therapist, attorney, CEO of Makeaway Media. Could you just give us a little background on yourself before we get started?
Well, that's pretty much it. I started off my career as a child protective service worker, and the state back then, I'm in Kentucky, if you can't tell from my accent. And the state back then was giving workers raises if you got a master's degree. So I got a master's degree in counseling, not really sure what I was going to do with that. It's actually an education with the concentration in counseling. And then I ended up going to law school because as a child protective service worker, I was going to court all the time. And I became interested in that. But by the time I finished with law school, I wanted nothing to do with law. And I never wanted to step foot in a court again. A family court is a crazy experience. So I realized, I found out that with my master's degree, I could become a therapist by completing just a couple more courses and taking a test. And I love that because I like to help people heal. I like to mend. And being a lawyer is a lot of fighting. And sometimes it's necessary fighting, and I understand that. Lawyers have jobs to do. But that just wasn't the course I wanted to take. And so through being a therapist, I realized how much writing helps children, because sometimes children, especially children who've been through a lot and have had to tell their story a lot, they just don't want to talk anymore. And so a lot of times they'll write or they'll draw. And through working with kids on creating their own stories in their own books, I fell in love with writing my own story in my own book. And that's how I got started 5 years ago with writing and publishing my first book.
Wow, that is so interesting. And that really shows really the power of books and why representation matters in books. Could you talk about that a little more, about how your work with children really showed you how it's important for kids to be able to see themselves in books?
Yes, I realized that the kids I work with, first of all, a lot of them had no books at all, none. And even in foster care, sometimes they wouldn't have any books because sometimes foster parents open up their home, but they might not have things that are age appropriate. Like, for example, they might be used to taking toddlers, but maybe this 14-year-old needs an emergency placement. So the foster parents will open up their home to that 14-year-old, and they don't really have anything for the 14-year-old. So I realized that a lot of kids didn't have books. So I started bringing books with me because, again, when kids don't want to talk, looking at a book and talking about the pictures, and through them telling me what they think the book is about or what the pictures are about, I would be able to kind of learn what their perspective on life was. So it was very helpful therapeutic wise. But I noticed that kids didn't want to read at all unless it was a story they could relate to. So kids are much more likely to read. Now, we all need to read books of all kinds. But for reluctant readers, kids who won't read at all, one of the greatest ways to get them interested in a book is to find books that reflect their experiences, or that are something that they can relate to, or a character who looks like them or people they know. I've seen lots of kids who told me they would never read and hate to read, fall in love with reading because they found the right book.
That's wonderful. And wonderful that you really stepped in to fill that gap, because that's something that's impressed me so much about you, is that a lot of people, they see that there's a need, but you took the next step and took action and said, well, then I'm going to write the books. If I can't find the books that I need, then I'm going to write them.
Yeah.
So,
and luckily, you know, I've had a lot of family support. You know, I think that we all have it in us to take action and do what we need, but some of us are just trying to make it day to day, especially if you have young kids or if you have some kind of trauma in your own life. So I don't take compliments very well, because I always feel like I know what I'm doing is special, but I always feel like we all have this in us. And I've seen that, you know, with the kids I work with, that people have written off. You know, I'd be in a courtroom and a judge would tell a child, you're never going to be anything. You're going to be just like your parent. And therapists tell kids that, teachers tell kids that, foster parents tell kids that. And I think, you know, the intentions are good. They're trying to motivate the child. But I've seen kids crushed by that. And
Sure.
that's really why I took action, because I felt helpless in this field. And actually, I was just talking to Becky this morning, the project manager for Multicultural Book Day. And I was telling her about, you know, what a sad, depressing field it is. And so I did do it for kids, but I also did it for me. Because if I didn't take some action, I just don't think I would have lasted in this career very long.
It would have been too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure that's why then your books have such a positive message. I mean, they really are so inspiring, encouraging, telling kids to follow their dreams.
Yes. Almost all of my books have some kind of coping skills in it. So when kids read my book, you know, it's not hitting them over the head. It's not saying, here's a list of coping skills, but they're woven throughout the story, things that kids can do. And so they'll read the book and they'll say, well, this worked for Kayla, or this worked for this kid in this book, so maybe it'll work for me. And I do try to keep all my stories positive. Some of them have some adversity just because you might introduce a problem. And I want to show kids, especially Black and brown kids, I want to show the world that they're problem solvers, that they can be leaders, that they can be heroes. And so there'll be a little bit of adversity in my books, but for the most part, it's about how to enjoy life, how to get over humps. And they are positive because I just don't feel like kids see enough of that. In fact, the series that I have that's coming out right now, Kayla, a Modern Day Princess, the very first book doesn't have a real heavy plot line. It's like a perfect bedtime story. And one of my friends posted on Facebook that her granddaughter, she asked her granddaughter, do you want me to read you a bedtime story? And the granddaughter said no. And she couldn't understand why. And when she asked her why, she said, because they give me nightmares. They're filled with horrible stories. Because we read our kids, we read our kids,
fairy tales
we read our kids bedtime stories that are like fairy tales, which are not nice, or, you know, Hansel and Gretel going in the oven, or or Jack and the Beanstalk, a giant falling from the sky. And so I love the first Kayla book because it is just a beautiful bedtime story with beautiful imagery. And so kids are just being flooded with this positivity, which I think we all actually need more of.
Definitely. But I also love that, especially you mentioned like in the later books, that it does mix in some problems, because I think sometimes if it's, you know, kids, they kind of know if it doesn't seem realistic. Like you said, they want to see themselves, and they want to see a kid who's dealing with maybe a situation that they've been dealing with but is able to overcome it.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about your latest series? I mean, you have so many books that you've written, but the newest one being about Kayla, because there are 5 different books. Could you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, I'm so proud of this series. I almost forgot to get the books, and I would have hated that because the covers are so beautiful. My illustrator, her name is Charlene Mosley, and I've been working with her for 4 years, and I never even met her in person until this summer. And we had the best time. You can go on my Instagram on author Deedee Cummings and see some of the pictures from around June this summer when Charlene and I met for the first time. But I'm so glad I didn't forget to bring these books, because I have to just show you the imagery. I mean, she's just an amazing illustrator. But those
are so beautiful.
Yeah. This is the first book that I was telling you about. Is kind of like a bedtime story. This is the second book. This is the third book. Oh, and the second book is called Dishes, Dancing, and Dreams. The third book is called Tough as Tulle. I hope everybody can see it, and let me know what you think of these covers, because I'm interested. These are brand new. These just came out. So
that's wonderful.
And this is the fourth book so far. There's one more coming in October, but this is the fourth book. These shoes are made for dancing, and I actually got a cutout made of this character because I love her so much, and I love her skirt. That it's
so where did the idea for Kayla come from, and then what's the process when you had this idea for the character?
One of the top questions I get from people is, how do you find an illustrator? And I'm just like, good luck. Because I didn't know when I first started reaching out to illustrators that a lot of them, if it says that they're repped by somebody, that you can't even contact them directly. You have to contact their representative. And then because they have an agent, if it says they're rep by somebody, they have an agent. And then even if you contact the agent, the vast majority of them, in fact, I would venture to say all, because I've never met one, cannot work with a self-published author, will not work with a self-published author. They only serve big publishing houses, and then they have a line of clients. So even if they would accept you as a self-published author, you're going to be getting in a really long line. So it was hard to find an illustrator, and I was very blessed I found Charlene, again, because the way that she brings my stories to life, her pictures tell a story just as much as my words do.
And that's one of the things that's different about being self-published, right? Because I haven't done it myself, but I had a friend who's going through the process of trying to publish through a publisher. And from what I understand, they find the illustrator and they do all that for you, which sounds really nice, but it's often out of your control. You kind of give control over it. And so they decide who the illustrator is and what they are. And sometimes you don't really have any feedback in that. I mean, what was it about self-publishing? Why did you decide to go that route as opposed to going through a traditional publisher?
Well, I know I told you when we talked a few days ago that one of my dreams has always been to be a writer, but I just didn't take the time to do it because I was always, you know, if you're working full time and going to law school and you have a family, I mean, there's only so much you can do. So I just never had time to write. But I'd say from about the age of 20, around the time I went to college and got serious about college, because when I first went to college, I wasn't serious about it. But around the time that it really clicked that this college education could really do something for me and I needed to take advantage of it, I started craving writing, where I would dream about it all the time. I would dream about stories and I would write little notes, but I never turned it into anything. And there wasn't anything called blogging back then. Otherwise, I'd have been a great writer because I would have just been blogging all of these ideas and stories a long time ago. But no Facebook, no Instagram, no blogging. But I always wanted to write, and luckily I was able to find that passion again when I started working with kids in foster care. And as they were writing their stories, I'd sit right alongside them and I would start writing some of my stories. And I think what happened was by the time I waited that long to write, I was in my mid 40s. So I look younger than I am, or at least that's what a lot of people tell me. And so a lot of people are surprised to know I wrote my first book when I was 44 years old. Right. And when I tell them that, you know, that kind of blows them away because you can do anything at any age. I mean, you can learn to fly a plane at 65. You can learn to play the piano at 70. Don't let your age be an inhibitor. Long story short, this is a long way of saying by the time I decided to write my own books, the last thing I was going to do was wait 2-3 years on publishing. Because if you have an idea for a book, then, hey, Adriana, I need to talk to you. DM me, hi. DM me your phone number, okay? Promise me. The 2 fingers up, promise me, okay? All right. So, so yeah, right. I see real talk, real worship, right? So true. And it is. The last thing I was going to do was submit an idea to a publishing company and wait months to hear back, only to maybe never hear back. And then technically, thank you, Asia, I'll be waiting on it. Technically, then you are not supposed to write multiple publishers at the same time. You're supposed to carefully vet the publisher that you're interested in, make sure that they publish books like you do. So you don't want to, so some publishers only publish romance books. Some publishers only publish YA. Some publishers, each agent that you approach and each publisher has a niche that they're interested in. So you have to carefully evaluate who you are going to write to, and you can't just send your stuff off to anybody. So after you do that, you pick one person to send it to, and sometimes people write back the same day, thank you, but no thank you, but sometimes they don't write back at all. So you wait 3 months thinking, oh, well, they're reading what I sent. And after about 3 months passes, then you can send another email and say, hey, I'm just checking in. I sent you something like 3 months ago. I don't want to bother you, but I'm just wondering. And then if you don't hear back to that email, then you can go and write somebody else. This could go on forever.
And that's just finding the publisher. And then of course,
right.
Right.
That's just finding the publisher.
Mhm.
Then once you get to the publisher, then it's like you were talking about earlier. They tend to almost always select your illustrator. So you're waiting on several factors to come together. You're waiting on them to pull this team together, an illustrator, an editor. Then you have to wait. Then you may still need to write because they might like your idea, but they want you to spin it in this way. Then you have to get that to the illustrator. Then it takes the illustrator quite a while to illustrate because you have to remember they're not just working on your project, they're working on lots of stuff. So then you have to wait on that. And then like one of my most successful books was a holiday book I wrote about Christmas because my family loves Christmas. And every year we collect books and we read those books at Christmas time. And one year I was fairly sure we had all of the books with Black protagonists. I mean, I'm talking like 15 books. I'm not talking a lot of books. I think we had the whole collection, which is sad if you think about it, because there are thousands of books with protagonists of other colors, but not a Black character. So I was also told that if I pitched that to a publishing house, that even after I waited all that time to get published, that it's possible that I see somebody else join. I'm so distracted by the feed because
I know it is hard to.
Nice, that's Denise. That's my buddy Denise. I'm so glad so many people who know me join. That means a lot to me. So thank you guys for getting on. But so say you went through all that I just described about waiting on publishing, and then your book is finally ready. Did you know that publishing companies won't tend to put out competing books because people might only buy one kid's Christmas book? So if that publishing company wants to put someone else's Christmas book out, you may actually have to wait until the next year for your book to be released because they don't want a lot. They're not gonna publish 3 books about Easter at one time. So it's a complicated process. And luckily, because I had worked so long and I was 44, I had not a lot of money, but just a little bit of money where I could pay for my own printing and pay for my own editor. And I just decided to send my own book through. I just decided I was going to do it. I wasn't going to wait. And I'm glad I did it. It's been a very rewarding career taking on this life as an author in middle age.
Yeah, and that you have so much more control over the process, the timing. And from what I understand, I've just heard a lot of stories about a lot of authors, diverse authors of diverse children's books, that it's even more complicated. I've seen, rejection letters floating around on social media that people, I can't think of the author's name right now. He turned in a book about a father. It was a children's book about a father, but it was a Black father. And they wrote back and said, I don't think people will be interested in this.
That's true.
The publisher. Yeah. And when you were talking about not having competing books, they probably have like a little section of like, okay, we want to publish one Black, quote unquote, Black children's book, and they don't want to do more than that. And it just seems like it's so even exponentially harder if you're writing books with Black characters, or if you're a Black author, just to try and get those published, because it just seems like a lot of authors of diverse children's books have decided to go the route of self-publishing for that reason.
Yes. Exponentially is the word. It is exponentially harder to publish books with diverse characters. In fact, I think it was the Council on Children's Books. Every year they put out statistics about the categories of characters in children's literature. And, for forever, I was going to say for the last 5 years, but honestly, forever, it has been easier for Black children. Now, everybody that's on, I want you to listen to this. I want you to get this point because this is important. It is easier for Black children to find a book about an animal or an inanimate object like a truck than it is for them to find a book with a character who looks like them. So, what that says to me as a child is nobody cares about my stories. I'm just not that important. No one wants to hear what I'm going through. I'm not reflected anywhere. And I love books about animals. When I was growing up, I loved the Berenstain Bears. There were even less books back then with characters who looked like me, but I loved the Berenstain Bears. That was one of my favorite book club. I must have had about 40 Berenstain Bears books. And my children love Clifford the Big Red Dog, Curious George, all that. It's great. But I think that my kids should have an easier time finding a story and a character that looks like them and reflects their experiences than stories about an inanimate object like a rock or an animal. I mean, honestly, that's shameful. And those are publishing decisions.
And of those books that they can find, how many of them are actually written by Black authors?
Oh, even less.
That's right, because a lot of times I'd be surprising. Then there's some books that we love that have Black characters, and then I flip and look at see who the author is, and they're white. And
Yeah.
seems like a lot of the big publishing houses, they got the message that we want diverse books, but they're not the own voices
And
books, which makes such a difference.
That's such an important point to make. That's a great point to make, because yes, some of the publishing houses did pick up on the craze and the word that, hey, we want more books with characters that that are different from the characters we currently have, and then they just continued to support the same authors that they had already been supporting, maybe like a James Patterson who writes adult and kids books. But Ada Twist Scientist, one of my favorite books. I love that book. And I never looked at the author information ever until recently. I found out that was written by a white woman, and I still love the book. It didn't change how much I love the book, but I was surprised. I was like, what a cool story. I wonder if Black people were in a better position to tell their stories, what more cool stories we would have.
Right. And like you said, there are a lot of really great, another example that came to my mind was Jabari Jumps, which is one of my favorite. I was also surprised to find out that was a white author. But part of the problem is one is just supporting more diverse authors, but also just the stories that you tell are different. It seems like the way you approach certain subjects and sensitivity towards different things or experience, perspective, all of that is going to be so different. Not to say that white authors, well, that's another whole discussion, whether white authors should tell those stories or not. But just the point is we really need more diversity in the characters, but also the authors and publishers.
Ada Twist Scientist and Jabari Jumps are great books. And I'm so glad they exist. And they're important books. So I don't want to take anything away from that. I just wish that more people of all backgrounds had the opportunity to tell their stories. I mean, honestly, if I want to read a book about someone who must use a wheelchair, I really prefer that book be written by someone who must use a wheelchair. That is the hashtag own voices. It's not just Black voices. It's voices of all backgrounds. The most authentic story told is told by the one who lived it.
Right. Well said. And so do you have any advice for someone who's hearing all this and is getting inspired and say, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to write my stories? What advice would you give to them?
To do it. Because even after I finished school, I had probably still a 5 to 10 year window where I still said I should write this book. And I don't know exactly what pivotal moment clicked for me. I know it had to do with me working with kids in therapy, but I had been working with kids in therapy for a while before I started using that writing technique. And so I'm not exactly sure at what point it clicked for me that this, was what I really needed to make happen. But time just continues to pass, and we don't know what life is going to bring. And I just knew I didn't want to be laying on my deathbed and wishing that I had done more of this and done that and completed this, and I wish I had written that book. That was something I could take in my hands and do. So my number one advice, I always say the same thing: write. Even if you think it doesn't make sense, you just never know. Let everything pour out on paper, and then you can join clubs. You can show it to friends who are positive. Friends who'll give you honest feedback, but not friends who'll say, you think you can write a book? Not those kinds of friends. But start sharing it with people. Join groups like here in Louisville, Kentucky, the SWBCI. I hope I'm pronouncing those letters right. They meet like every Thursday at 7 at Barnes and Noble. You could go to a group like that. There are lots of people who would be interested in reading what you write and supporting you through that process, but you got to start writing. If you don't write, then you have nothing to share. And then the second thing I always tell people is to not talk negatively to themselves during that process. Don't, because you will say to yourself, why are you writing this? This is a waste of time. I could be washing dishes right now. I got a load of laundry I got to put in.
Right.
You know, why am I doing this? And you can talk yourself out of a great story. Don't do that, because you have to remember, I don't care who you are. Every single person on this planet has some kind of story to share. And so when you're writing, write for you. Write for you. And then there will be people out there who your story will resonate with. So don't worry about the masses. Don't worry about New York Times bestseller, because the honest to God's truth is most of us never make that, and that's okay. As long as you find your clique that you help through your writing, that's all you should care about. And every single one of us has a group of people on the planet like that. But if you don't start writing, you'll never find that.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. It's always so much fun to talk to you, and I just find it so inspiring. You know, you talked about starting writing in your mid-40s, and I'm in my mid-40s, so this is a great message for all of us to hear. And you just have so much wonderful insight, and I love your books, love the message you're putting out in the world, especially for our children. So thank you so much.